Holly mentioned, I do also have a certification in lifestyle medicine, which is essentially how do we live healthy, right? And not have to take a whole bunch of medicines and come to my office too often, right? So that's my goal at the end of the day. So I'm hoping to give you some very practical tips on how do we achieve that, right? And I entitled today's talk An Intro to Longevity, right? So when we think about that, what comes to mind when we think intro to longevity? We think about, well, how can we live longer, right? And I'm going to spin the definition of that just a little bit, right? Instead of just living longer, how can we live well longer, right? And improve our, what I'm going to call health span. And that term is not coined by me. It's been coined by many other people before. But how do we improve our health span? So our goal this evening is to provide some very practical approaches with kind of the high yield topics for improving health span. So those are our learning objectives. And as we go, we're going to pause at different points for you to write down your own personal goals as we talk about these different things, okay? And then everybody, I hope, has gotten a card. That will become more clear what we're going to do with that here in just a few minutes, okay? So, as I mentioned, as we go, whenever this slide comes up, this is an opportunity for us to write down our goals for the topic we just covered, okay? So I'm going to introduce to you the idea of a SMART goal. So when you write a goal, it can't just be, I want to be healthier, okay? It has to be specific. It has to be measurable, it has to be achievable, relevant, and time-bound, right? So instead of I will eat better, right, I want to see I'm going to bring an apple for a snack every day to work instead of that bag of chips, right? So very, very specific with our goals because I find that they're more actionable that way. So when this shows up, we're going to take a pause and do that. Well, when we think about longevity, I think we have to talk about lifespan, right? And average life expectancy was just recently revised, now down to just, on average, 76 years, give or take. 79 for women, 73 for men, right? Now, a lot of this has to do with COVID in the last couple of years, right? That's one of the larger chunks. But it still doesn't even get close to things like heart disease and cancer and stroke and those kind of things. So I mentioned before longevity versus health span. And I'll draw your attention to a couple of things, and I'm going to have some graphs in here, not to make things complicated, but just to illustrate a point, that you'll see sort of peak intellectual and physical function in your 20s to 30s. And you'll notice the dark line towards the bottom is your average population. And you'll notice a fairly steep decline in health span as we hit our 50s, 60s, and certainly our 70s, so that by the time you hit your 70th year, you've lost about 50% of that function you had when you were in your 20s and 30s. Exactly. So our goal is to try to minimize that loss of health span and make that last decade much higher quality of life. That's the purpose of today's talk, is to push that curve to be more of a square so that your health span, your quality of life, doesn't fall off until the very last moment, right? So we can live a very full life. So I like to open with this. What is your purpose? Why are you here? Right? You say, well, to live longer. We heard you talking, that's why we came, right? But it needs to be deeper than that, right? So we find that people that don't have a purpose end up sitting on the recliner in front of the TV, right? And then health really plummets. This especially happens to us as we retire, right? So as we go through for the rest of the talk, I want you to begin to formulate in your mind, what is your purpose, right? Is it to see certain parts of the country? Is it to care for loved ones? To be healthy enough to care for loved ones? And it needs to be something deeper than that. Consider this. That 10 years that we talked about often means the difference between knowing an entire generation of your family. Right? Pretty significant when I think about it that way. So, what is your purpose? And if you start to think about it, go ahead and jot it down. I see everybody's got notepads and everything. So 80%, what is 80%? 80% is the number of people that want to do something to be healthier, just don't know where to start, right? So let's talk about where to start. So this graph represents the biggest impact for different things. So you see on the far left side, low cardiorespiratory fitness, right, has the biggest impact, or the biggest attributable fraction as it's labeled on there, to health or unhealth and mortality. So where should we focus our time? Improving our cardiorespiratory fitness, right? And thankfully, this is something that we all can do, certainly at different levels. So, unfortunately, when you look at the amount of people that actually get the recommended amount of cardiorespiratory fitness, it's only around 20% of the population, right? So that same 80% of people that want to do better are the same 80% likely that aren't getting enough physical activity, right? And does the type of physical activity matter? Well, we'll talk about that too. What's interesting about physical activity, and this is the graphs that I have here, and I want to draw your attention to the graph on the left, is when you go from no physical activity whatsoever, so just enough activity to get dressed, get to your job, sit down at a computer, drive home, hit the drive-through, and get back into your chair to watch TV, right? If you go from 0 to 1, just a little bit of physical activity, 15 minutes, that's it, you see a 20% reduction in mortality compared to people that are not doing anything activity whatsoever. There is no pill that I can prescribe that will give you that sort of benefit, right? So just a little bit of physical activity, not even to the point that you're meeting the recommended amount, but just a little bit of physical activity has significant implication for longevity. Again, reduces your all-cause mortality, meaning the likelihood that you're to die compared to a normal population by 20%. And if you get to that 150 minutes that we're going to talk about, it drops even further, up to 30%. Now, they did a study with VA patients, veteran patients, who had high blood pressure. Those guys, when they went from sedentary to active, reduced their mortality by almost 50%. Right? So significant impact from physical activity. And the graph on the right, very simply, is as you increase your leisure time physical activity, just activity period, your lifespan, the number of years that you live, increases significantly. Right? So you are literally adding years to your life just by being physically active. Now, how much physical activity does it take? Well, as I mentioned, just 15 minutes a day is where you begin to see a reduction of 20%. Now, you'll see a couple of different lines on here. The solid line is moderate physical activity, and we'll talk about what that is in just a second. The red line is that high-intensity physical activity. So in terms of bang for your buck, the high-intensity physical activity gets you a whole lot of benefit real fast, right? But it may not be where we want to spend all of our time, okay? The point is, even a little bit of physical activity pays huge dividends when it comes to health and longevity. What are these guys? Mitochondria. Okay, these are the cell's powerhouse. This is where your body makes energy and processes, or gives your body the energy to process different things, right? So what we have found is that the more mitochondria your body makes, the more equipped you are to deal with the stresses that life throws at you, whether that's a viral infection or a pneumonia or the ability to exercise. Mitochondria give us the power to manage all of those things. And the good news is you can actually increase the number of mitochondria your body has. And wouldn't you know it, it's with exercise. So which exercises should I do? What types of exercise are there? Walking, a good exercise. Highly underrated, walking. What else?
Core strength.
Core strength, that's right. Or strength in general, right? Building muscle, absolutely. What else?
Do water aerobics.
Water aerobics, yeah, or aerobic activity, right? Increasing that cardiorespiratory fitness, absolutely. Riding bicycles. All good examples of exercise. And then I wrote underneath it, movement is NEAT. Well, NEAT is actually an acronym in exercise science that stands for non-exercise activity. Right? So non-exercise activity. And basically this is fidgeting, right? This is how you don't sit still. These are the people that get up, move around, they're the knee bouncers, right? And fidgeters tend to burn upwards of 500 calories more a day than non-fidgeters. So to all you teachers that ever told me to stop bouncing my knee, right? So you are allowed to fidget because it burns more calories. Again, upwards of 500 calories. And there's some studies that say if you're really fidgety, then you can burn even more than that, right? So movement is NEAT. That non-exercise activity thermogenesis is what it fully stands for. So the more you move, the more calories you burn, and even a little fidgeting is going to help you burn more calories, right? So we talked about numbers of different exercises. So we've got aerobic exercise, and this is really where you create those mitochondria. That's where you build that cardiorespiratory fitness, is through that aerobic exercise. Strength and resistance, this is maintaining your muscle mass. I once heard a lady give a speech where one of her goals was to be able to get off the commode when she was older. I won't say who that was, but she may or may not be in this room. And I think that's a good goal, right? So what that means, though, is maintaining your independence, right? Maintaining muscle mass. And a sedentary lifestyle, by the time you get to 65, you lost upwards of 80% of your muscle mass, right? But that's not an inevitability. We can prevent that. And if you've lost it, it can be regained, right? So strength training, very important. Flexibility, this is stretching, right? And this is how we prevent injury during those exercises, okay? And then balance, this is how we prevent falls. So a lot of people talk about calcium and bone density, important, but not falling in the first place, also very important, right? So balance, very important. So what counts as moderate physical activity? In layman's terms, I can probably have a conversation, but I wouldn't be able to sing, right? I could probably do 3 or 4 word sentences. It's that level of activity, right? And in exercise science, we would call that zone 2 training. That's where you build those mitochondria. That's where you build the capacity to deal with disease. That's where you build the capacity for more exercise, right? So that's where you build most of your cardiorespiratory fitness. And as such, we should spend most of our time in this type of activity. So again, 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity. And what you notice on here is that there's no gym up here, right? You don't have to go to the gym to do exercise. So we're not talking about high-level hiking. We're not talking about fast ballroom dancing, right? We're just talking about moderate movement. We're not talking about Lance Armstrong-style cycling. We're talking about a ride, active pedaling around the block, right? So strength training, building muscle, right? Giving us the ability to maintain independence. We want to shoot for about 2 days a week, okay? So the moderate intensity physical activity, we want to do 3 to 4 days a week. Strength training, we want to do at least 2 days a week, non-consecutive days, okay? Gentlemen, I see a lot of questions about testosterone. If you want to maintain your testosterone, lift heavy things. That's the best way to boost your testosterone. Now, women need testosterone too. So women, I want you to lift heavy things too, okay? Not just for the guys. So, strength training about twice a week. How you do it doesn't really matter. Body weight, bands, weights, big cans of soup from Costco, right? Whatever you've got will work, okay? Flexibility we do at the end of our exercise, not at the beginning. We do it after we've warmed up. It should take no more than 2 or 3 minutes to really do a full flexibility routine, right? Just major muscle groups, feel a stretch. There's tons of YouTube videos if you've got access to internet and YouTube. Most of our smartphones will get on YouTube. Tons of flexibility routines. No pain, no gain does not apply to flexibility, okay? We should feel a little bit of a stretch, but it should not be painful. Put this at the end of your workout, again, 2 or 3 days a week. So, if I were to summarize, move more. Shoot for that 150 minutes, but if you can only do 15, you will still see significant benefit in mortality, in cardiorespiratory fitness. Fidgeting is encouraged because it helps us burn more calories and keep us in a more normal weight. Do an intense activity at least once a week. Okay, whatever that activity is. Something intense, something that gets your heart rate up, something where you just can't get more than one word out at a time. That level of activity. Okay? That's what I mean by high intensity. And then stretch at the end of your exercise. Okay? So, this is the part where you write down a specific goal. If you're already doing some moderate intensity physical activity, that's great. How can we add a little strength training to your routine? How can we add a little flexibility to your routine? Again, any movement that you can do is good movement, right? If it has to be from a chair because of balance or because of pain, do that. Whatever you can do will benefit you, okay? So, twice a week, I will go for a walk with my dog for 15 minutes around the block at 9 o'clock in the morning or when I get home from work. Be very specific. Give yourself something to measure. Write it on a Post-it note and put it on your bathroom mirror, right? Sign it. Make yourself accountable for the goal. Our next biggest bucket for improving our health is nutrition. How many people feel like they have a good handle on nutrition and don't feel like they have heard any confusing things on the internet and have not tried any fad diets because they have everything? Yeah, so nutrition is very confusing, right? Very confusing. And I'm going to let out a kind of a dirty secret is that most physicians don't even get a whole lot of nutrition training, right? So we're going to try to dispel a little myth and hit some of the high points for nutrition, okay? But I always like to start with a food quiz, so we'll see, all of you that raised your hands, we'll see how much you actually know. So how many calories does the average person consume per day?
2,000.
2,000. That's what we read on the back of the labels anyway, right?
3,500.
3,500. Now, did you peek at my slides before we
did
started?
not.
Okay. So it is 3,700 calories a day. Now, I'm about 6'1", 6'2", 185 pounds. I exercise 4 to 7 times a week, depending on how much my kids let me. And I only need about 2,700 calories a day to maintain this weight and this activity level. So 3,700 calories a day for most of the population is probably too much. Okay? Now, what percentage of those calories come from processed or ultra-processed foods?
80%.
80%, you're close. So 70% of our calories are coming from processed or ultra-processed food. And you say, well, why does that matter? Good question. So again, what we're looking at is the number of servings of ultra-processed food consumed per day, okay, versus all-cause mortality. So the higher you go up on that chart, the more problem it's causing. The greater the impact it has on your lifespan, your health span. And what you'll see is a very linear relationship. You eat more junk, you don't live as long. Period. So, what are the top 5 sources of food for people over the age of 2?
French fries.
So that's actually the number 1 consumed vegetable in the United States, is the French fry. Exactly right. So pizza is the number 5 top consumed food or source of calories. Energy drinks or sugar-sweetened beverages. In Texas, it may be more sweet tea than soda. Okay. Chicken dishes, right? Bread is actually the number 2 source of calories. Bagels, toast, buns, on everything. And the number 1 source of calories, any guesses? It is a grain-based dessert. And yes, that is a Round Rock donut with their Texas-sized donut. Okay? I heard a statistic fairly recently. 40% of people that work in an office have a donut every day for work, for breakfast. 40%, right? So, those are the top calorie sources for most people over the age of 2. So, as I look at pictures like this is a map created by the CDC of number of heart attacks by region. So the darker the red, the more heart disease.
We're there.
And what hurts me is that the South is littered with heart disease, right? What about stroke? Same thing, right? So the greatest link between heart disease and stroke has been diet related. And in fact, there was a study that looked at just that called the Regard study. I won't bore you with the details, but I'll put up this infographic, right? That people that ate a Southern dietary pattern, which I have listed out for you up there, added fats, fried food, French fries, right? Lots of eggs, organ and processed meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, had a significantly higher risk of heart disease, the number 1 killer, and has been for decades. Significantly higher risk of heart disease. You're more likely for chronic kidney disease to progress if you eat this way, and you're at a 30% increased risk of stroke. So, a very strong correlation between diet and those 2 pictures that I showed you, risk of heart disease and stroke. So, I'm going to put a couple of concepts on your plate, as it were. One is the idea of calorie density, right? So, an ultra-processed food, you've got oil on the far left. This is the most calorie-dense food out there. It's about 120 calories per tablespoon. And I don't know about you, but a tablespoon of oil is not going to keep me full. Okay? So, 120 calories. So, cheese, again, is basically fat, a little bit of protein and salt. Very calorie-dense. Then meat, then your beans or starchy vegetables, and then your green leafy or non-starchy vegetables. So if I was to try to design a diet that's going to keep me full, but keep my calories down, it's going to be an unprocessed, very plant-forward diet. So concept number 1, calorie density. Same amount of sugar. Now, I don't know about you, I'd probably turn orange before I got through all those carrots, right? But just to illustrate, when we look at ultra-processed foods, right, how much sugar, plus the Snickers is going to have added fat and lots of other bad things that we don't need, okay? The American Heart Association says we should have less than 6 teaspoons of sugar a day, right? Most of us can get there with 1 soda. So, we've got to be careful with added sugar. The other concept I want to throw out is the idea of a whole grain. Carbohydrates often get a bad rap. Who's heard carbs are bad? Everybody, right? There's a caveat, right? Bad carbs are bad, right? There is such a thing as a good carbohydrate. And those good carbohydrates are the unprocessed carbohydrates, or whole grains. Right? So when we think of rice as a very simple example, white rice has had the bran removed from it. So you're just left with the inside of the rice, which is essentially sugar. But by removing the bran, you've taken away the fiber, the protein, and the vitamins from that grain. The same is true for flour. When you process flour and you have white flour, you've removed the bran, the protein, and the vitamins. When you get a minute, look up the story of Wonder Bread. We don't have time for it now, but it's a great story about how Wonder Bread came into existence. So, we want to make all of our carbohydrates real carbohydrates, unprocessed carbohydrates, whole grain carbohydrates. Okay? The last concept I want to leave you with is the food package. And I have a picture up here for illustration of an apple. One apple is about 60 calories and about 6 grams of fiber. As soon as I peel the apple, I've lost 5 grams of that fiber. So I'm down to just 1 gram. And if I chop it up and make apple sauce, then it gets absorbed much, much faster, turns into sugar much, much faster in your system. The body has to respond much more aggressively with insulin. And we call that a high glycemic index food. We want to avoid those. And if I turn it into apple juice, well, then I've processed it even farther. And if I add some processed carbohydrate and some fat and some additional sugar, I now have an apple fritter, right? All of them technically have apple in them, but consider the package, okay? Another way to look at this is dairy. Dairy is a great source of calcium, but it's also the #1 source of saturated fat in the American diet, which is the artery clogging fat, the heart attack causing fat. So is there a better source of calcium? Yeah, there are plenty of better sources of calcium. Okay, so think about that. So if I'm looking for an apple, I'm certainly not going to go for the apple fritter, but I even have to be careful with some of the juices. So is there a better package, a less processed package, for me to get my calories from? So I mentioned a plant-forward diet, and I'm going to put this up here because there's been a big trend for plant-based meats, right? Technically, Oreo cookies don't have any cream or dairy in them, right? So they're technically a plant-based cookie or a vegan cookie, if you want to use that term. But what I would like to point out is that if you eat an unhealthy plant-based diet, which is the solid line on the far right, the red line, I don't know if there's a pointer. So this red line is a standard American diet, and the dotted line is an unhealthy plant-based diet, both of which increase your risk for heart disease. And in fact, an unhealthy plant-based diet may be worse than your standard American diet. So when I say a plant-forward diet, I mean an unprocessed plant-forward diet. Okay? Real vegetables. So, if we were to modify the existing USDA plate, what I would suggest and what the literature would promote is that probably half of our plate is a vegetable, a non-starchy vegetable. We think greens, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, cauliflower, those sorts of things. Non-starchy vegetables. About a quarter of our about a quarter of our plate should be a starchy vegetable or a whole grain, and about a quarter of our plate is a bean or a lean protein, right? And I've written on there just the number of servings we want to shoot for per day. The other thing this does is bring up a nutritional deficiency that nobody tends to talk about, which is fiber. The average American only gets about 15 grams of fiber per day when the recommended minimum is 25. So if you have not been regular, this is a way to fix that. So I meant to put another SMART goal in there, so I apologize. So take a moment, think about your diet, and I want you to write your own goal for improving your nutrition. So what can be changed? And it's not that this is not an all or none strategy, right? So having the cookie for your birthday, still okay.
A cookie.
I'm glad somebody caught it. Yeah, the birthday cookie, and I don't mean one of those big cookie company cookies either.
Can you go back to the last line? There
Yeah.
you go.
Absolutely.
What about Greek yogurt?
So there's a lot of interesting literature about yogurt. It's going to be person specific, but should be okay. What you have to be careful of is, have they added any extra sugar? And often a container of yogurt has the same amount of sugar, sometimes more, than a can of soda. So those original red top Yoplait yogurts have the same amount of sugar as a can of Dr. Pepper.
What about eggs? I hear Greek better, good, bad, Greek good.
Greek, low-fat Greek is going to be a better option when we talk about, again, you got to watch the sugar content. So add your own fruit if you want to make it sweet. So eggs are a challenging topic, and it's going to be person specific, right? The yolk has a lot of cholesterol. It's got a lot of vitamins, but it also has a lot of cholesterol. So if you are a cholesterol sensitive person, eggs are not going to be a great idea.
So being diabetic is not good. You shouldn't be eating a whole lot of eggs.
Not at the expense of your greens and veggies. Right. So, and there's a big caveat with nutrition. It's going to be very person specific. I cannot give you a single diet that everyone should follow. I can make some generalities, right? So the person next to you may be able to tolerate 4 eggs a week and not see rises in cholesterol or heart disease risk, where you may not, right? That's something that you're going to have to find out over time as you visit with your primary doctor. So a little caveat with eggs. Yes, ma'am.
Almond milk.
So a good alternative, in fact, it often has more calcium than dairy milk does without any of the fat that dairy milk does. Again, you got to be careful which kind you buy because it's often sweetened, right?
So does it fit up there with the grain?
So it would be a better alternative than dairy, full fat dairy anyway.
Oh,
Yeah, a better alternative. Yeah.
When you're talking about processed foods,
Mhm.
say if you're one of those people that for lunch, you make a protein shake. You have an organic protein powder with probiotics and enzymes and everything in it. You're doing it with almond milk.
Yeah.
So it ends up being low calorie. When processed food, is it the same bad stuff or is that okay?
So it depends on the protein and it depends on how you tolerate it, right? So it's always better to get the food as a whole, right? That's how it was intended to be. Our bodies process it better. The trouble with smoothies often is the glycemic index rises very sharply once you blend it up and sort of pre-process it that way. The nutrients are there. And often is better than fast food ever will be, right? So yes, there can be a place for it, depending on your ability to process blood sugar, that sort of thing. So again, a little caveat. Most people, if we do it well, can have a smoothie without too much trouble. Absolutely.
What about skim milk?
And so the literature is much more favorable for skim milk than it is full fat milk. Absolutely. And it's actually included in part of the DASH diet, which is the American Heart Association's recommended diet. So DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop High Blood Pressure, which, as we saw in that first slide, is a big deal when it comes to mortality and heart disease risk. So the American Heart Association feels like there is a role for skim milk in limited quantity in your diet. Good question. And this is where we could do an entire hour talking about nutrition, and maybe we should. But we've made certainly some generalities here. Okay, what is sleep? Yeah, so why do you sort of touched on why we need it. So sleep is maybe an altered level of consciousness intended for the body to be restored, right? Sleep does a number of different things, but what happens if you don't get enough of it or too much of it? That's why we see what we call a U-shaped curve. You don't sleep enough, your risk of dying increases. You sleep too much, and your risk of dying increases. So there is a sweet spot when it comes to sleep. Now, I'm sure many of you, like me, have sort of bragged about the number of things I've done on very little sleep, right? But that's probably not the right way to go, right? So what we have found is that shooting for that 6 to 8 hours of sleep a night is where most people fall for good restorative sleep. Now, one of the things that I run into frequently is people come into my clinic and they say, well, my memory hasn't been great. What do I need to do? I say, well, how much are you sleeping? I don't know, 4 or 5 hours a night. Where is memory consolidated? During sleep, right? So often the biggest trouble with memory has to do with chronic insufficient sleep. So instead of staying up all night cramming for that test, you'd probably have been better off getting a full night's sleep.
Now you tell me.
Exactly. We made it anyway. So there's this idea that we need less sleep as we get older. And to some extent that's true, but often the reason we're getting by on less sleep is because we're doing less during the day. So if you're doing the physical activity that we talked about earlier, you're going to need that extra sleep time to recover. Okay? One of the jokes in the exercise literature field is that the gym is not where muscle is built. Sleep is where muscle is built, because that's true. That's where all the damage you've done during your exercise gets repaired. That's where your body adapts. That's where you really make your gains in physical activity. It's in sleep. So for about every hour of sleep that you skimp on, you will lose about a year of life in general. That's the current estimation. So for every hour of sleep that you skimp on will equate to about a year of your longevity, of your lifespan. So sleep is one of those areas that we really need to be careful about. So I'm going to give everybody some homework, and I want you to calculate your sleep efficiency. It's a very simple calculation, and this will tell you pretty quickly if you need more sleep or less sleep. So you're going to take the total time that you slept and divide that by the amount of time you stayed in bed. And then multiply it by 100. So if you have a very high sleep efficiency, your sleep efficiency is over 90%, you're one of those people, my head hits the pillow, I'm out, and I don't wake up until my alarm goes off, you need more sleep. Give yourself some more time. You need more sleep. If you're a person that has to lay in bed and flip on the right side and the left side and back and forth, and then you wake up, 30 minutes before your alarm clock goes off and just can't go back to bed, you probably don't need to be in bed that long. So get out of bed, okay? Go do something. Use that time to do your physical activity, okay? So calculate your sleep efficiency, and you can begin to adjust in 15-minute intervals your sleep cycle. Now, the caveat is that you don't have some sleep disorder like sleep apnea or restless leg or something else. If that's the case, we want to get you guys treated and seen by your primary doctors.
So what if you get up 3 times in the night to go to bed?
Then you need to be talking to your doctor, or you need to be letting off the caffeine by about 2 in the afternoon. How long does caffeine last in your system?
14 hours.
6 to 8 hours generally. Yeah, depending. Yeah. For most people, the average is about 6 hours. So if you're having trouble, if you're a coffee drinker in the evening, I would try to limit that past 2 p.m. Okay? If you're a nightstand bottled water drinker, you might want to limit that to about an hour before bedtime, maybe more. If you're a man of some age and you find that you're up multiple times, go talk to your doctor about your prostate. Okay? That sleep is important. So, what are the caveats? The important measures of good sleep? Only get in bed when you are sleepy. Don't force it. The bedroom is for sleep and marital activity only. So if you're sitting in bed watching TV, that's a no-no. If you're reading a book, take it somewhere else. Every light that you have in your room is a hindrance to your sleep. We are very light-activated, light-driven people. So getting rid of that bright in-your-face light an hour or two before bed will help you boost melatonin very naturally, which is your sleep onset hormone. The other thing you need to do is get some sunshine, because there's no better way to suppress melatonin early in the day, which then leads to a big increase in melatonin once it's dark and helps you get to sleep better. If you can't fall asleep within 15, 20 minutes, get out of bed, go do something boring. Do not turn on the TV, because that's stimulated, and whatever melatonin level you had will disappear like that. So turn on a soft light, do a crossword puzzle or a Sudoku. If you need a medical textbook, come see me. I will give you one. They put me to sleep very quickly. We want to try to avoid napping, okay? If you need a nap, if you absolutely have to have one, 30 minutes or less. We don't want to get into a full sleep cycle with your nap, okay? So
30 minutes one time a day?
Power nap may be okay, right? But again, 30 minutes or less.
Does it honor the circadian rhythm that we might be having?
Correct. It will disrupt it. If you're taking a nap that lasts more than about 60 minutes, you're going to disrupt your circadian rhythm. So no naps. And then learn from those bad nights, right? If I can't sleep, if I'm getting up, tossing and turning, what happened? Was there some stressful thing? What is it that drove that? We're going to talk in a minute about stress, right? And how stress can impact sleep. So, your SMART goal. I hope everybody's SMART goal is I will calculate my sleep efficiency. Did you have a question?
Is it, I've heard it both ways. How does it work if you're trying to catch up on sleep? Is that something you can do, or is that something that's impossible, and once you've lost that night of sleep, it's gone forever?
So the idea of sleep catch-up. There's a lot of different literature on this, and you're going to get probably 4 different opinions. You ask 4 different people. So yes, there may be a way to catch up on sleep, but you can't do it in one go. To truly catch up on your sleep and get back to a normal routine often takes several weeks to do. So if it's a little bit of sleep, you might be able to catch up with 1 or 2 sleep cycles. If you stayed up all night, you're going to have a whole lot more trouble. And for the shift workers out there, bless your heart. I feel for you, because that's really, really tough on your system to work a varied shift. Who here feels like they have a good handle on stress? Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that. Who has ever thought about stress as a connection to chronic disease? Okay, good. I figure the people that are coming here have probably been exposed to that idea already. Well, good. So yes, stress absolutely is connected to chronic disease. And this is just a graph depicting that. What you see on the bottom of the chart is a stress scale. These are self-reported stress scales. And what you'll notice is that hazard ratio, meaning your risk of dying, increases significantly in a very linear pattern with the amount of stress you feel. So not managing stress also significantly impacts our longevity, our health span. So, what happens? Why is that? Well, what we know is that when you are chronically stressed, those stress hormones tend to stay higher in your system. Your adrenal gland, where you produce those stress hormones, is overactive. And as a result, blood pressure stays high. We saw the impact from blood pressure earlier, significant impact on mortality. Your adrenal glands enlarge and stay that way. You can develop ulcers in the stomach. Your immune system actually declines, so your risk of infection goes higher. And since we just dealt with a whole bunch of viral crud going around, not managing stress can get us into trouble. Now, who has thought about managing stress just like they would manage their blood pressure? or their diabetes. And I want us to begin to think about it that way. Again, because it significantly impacts our health span. So chronic stress leads to your body's natural resources becoming depleted. So I want to take a moment and I want everybody to do a little stress inventory. What are the significant stressors in your life? Is there a chronic emotional stressor? Are there some recurrent conflicts that you're dealing with? Now, many of us may not have been ready for this part when they came to the longevity talk, right? So as you think about those stressful events, I know I'm thinking about them now and I can feel my shoulders starting to rise just as I think about those things. So how can we begin to address them? What can we do for stress relief? Exercise. What a great answer.
Eat healthy.
Eat healthy, absolutely.
Box breathing.
Or at least not stress eat. Say again?
Box breathing.
Box breathing.
Meditating.
Absolutely. In fact, used by our military before they go do stressful events, right? And has a measurable impact on heart rate, on blood pressure, which is why they do it. Absolutely. So box breathing actually will turn on your parasympathetic nervous system, down-regulate your sympathetic nervous system, which helps get that stress under control. Box breathing is a great one. What is box breathing? We'll do it together. So, big deep breath in, nice and slow over 2 seconds. Hold that breath in for about 2 seconds. Breathe out nice and slow, about 2 seconds. Hold it out. Big deep breath in. Hold it. Let it out. And hold it. And generally this is done over a period of about 2 minutes. And within that 2 minutes, there is often a measurable decrease in perceived stress, in heart rate, in blood pressure. So it can be very helpful and doesn't take much time to do. There's lots of ways to reduce stress. If you can, reduce the number of stressors, right? And this is where the power of no comes in, right? One of my favorite things that I've learned in the last decade is say no. If your plate's full, say no. You're allowed. I'm giving you permission to say no. Must do it. Deliberate relaxation, mindfulness, meditation, abdominal breathing like we just did. Exercise. Who maintains a hobby? Excellent. Excellent. Hobbies are a great way to reduce stress. So lots of different ways. Often we can leverage our humanity, right? By doing things like volunteering. Those are great ways to reduce stress. The sense of accomplishment, fulfillment, those are great ways to reduce stress. Temple Community Clinic. Absolutely. When you get home, search for this. It's a parody. Nature RX. There are several different versions of this now. I won't play it out of sake of time. But there's a lot of truth to this very tongue-in-cheek video. Now, I want to bring up a very unique emotion. Gratitude. Why gratitude of all the emotions that we could possibly talk about, right? Well, gratitude is an interesting emotion that it takes two people to facilitate, to create, right? It's also a very long-lasting emotion. I can think back to something that somebody did for me from 20 years ago, still puts a smile on my face all those years later. Very long-lasting emotion. Not only that, it actually will improve those feel-good hormones in your brain. So it helps you fight depression, anxiety. And in fact, we talked about stress a minute ago. Very interesting study. They took college kids, and before they went in for an exam, they had one group think about all the stuff they were worried about and stressed about. They had another group think about all the things they were grateful for, and then measured how they did on their exam. Now, can you guess which group did better? Absolutely. Because they went into that exam much calmer than the other group. So they said, well, that was an interesting finding. What if we do that with people suffering from insomnia? And in this time, we'll do three things. We'll have one group think about the things that they're stressed about and worried about, all the things they have to do. We'll have another group count sheep as a control group. And then we'll have the third group count their blessings. Which group went to sleep fastest? Absolutely. So, count your blessings instead of sheep, and you will get to sleep a whole lot faster. Right. So, it helps us maintain a very healthy outlook. Right? So, how do we do that practically? How can we infuse gratitude into our day? So when my kids get up, they're like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed. It's still dark outside, Dad. Yes, I know, daylight savings time. Right? What are you looking forward to today? That's how we want to start our day. Right? At the end of the day, when they get home, we do something where we go around the dining room table and say, tell me something good. To reframe the day. Often we can think of at least one thing that was good during the day. So tell me something good. Okay? Now, I've given everybody a thank you card. I want to take just a moment, and I want you to write somebody that you know a thank you card. And my challenge for you is to deliver that card, preferably in person. And I want you to stand there when they read it and see what kind of reaction you get. This is going to take many people out of their comfort zone, but that's on purpose. So take just a minute, think of somebody that you're thankful for, and write them a note. And I realize we're running short on time, but since we started 5 minutes late, I'm going to steal 5 more minutes. And we'll keep going. So the last part of my talk is about connectedness and positivity, which is why I had you do this exercise. Okay? So, what is it about connectedness and positivity that would bring it into a longevity talk? We're going to talk about that. So, people that generally have a positive outlook have higher levels of those feel-good hormones compared to people that tend to be negative Nancys. Apologies if your name is Nancy. They tend to have lower blood pressure. They have better immune functioning. They have less heart disease. Number one killer. They have less heart disease. Even with the same stage of cancer, if they have a positive outlook, their outcomes with cancer treatment are better. Given the exact same stage, the exact same treatment, they still do better. with cancer. And they live longer. And we'll talk about how much in just a second. One of the more recent studies on positive outlook, positive mental attitude, and longevity decreased mortality by upwards of 20 or 30%. Just having a glass half full personality. You say, well, that's never been me. I'm more on the glass half empty spectrum. Is there a way that I can move towards a glass half full kind of person? Well, yeah, there certainly is. And there's a lot of research being done into positive psychology. How do we move towards being more positive? How can we build positivity into our day-to-day? And the acronym I have up here is PERMA, which are sort of the 5 tenets of positive psychology. The P is positive emotion, right? When we think about positive emotion, what are some things we can do to build positivity into our day-to-day? Well, I've given you one way with that thank you card. What's another way? When you think about a positive interaction, what happens? My wife is a person that knows no stranger, much to my chagrin. But often, we're in the grocery store, and she has no qualms about turning to the person behind us and saying, I love your blouse, you have a great lipstick, and you should see the people light up when she says that, right? It's just her nature. Very positive person. I'm fortunate to have her. So, eye contact, a genuine hello, a genuine how are you, can make a huge difference in how you perceive your day. So think of ways that we can build positivity into our interactions. Engagement. What I mean here is often, what do you do for fun? And that's why I asked about hobbies earlier. There's a great book written called Flow by a guy named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. You thought I wasn't going to say it. But it talks about the science of flow, or you may have heard it put this way, being in the zone. Right? We often think about athletes being in the zone, or musicians being in the zone. Well, we can get in the zone too, right? And in fact, what we notice is that people that spend time in the zone, not only are they more efficient, but they finish the day happier, less stressed. So engage those hobbies. Leverage them to your benefit. Positive relationship. Another reason I had you write this card. And what's interesting about positive relationship is that this has been something that's been studied since 1938. In fact, the longest, still ongoing study in the U.S., put on by Harvard, studied 268 Harvard sophomores. This is how it began. And 456 inner city youths, low socioeconomic background. And they studied a number of different factors. Levels of education, success in their job, whether they were married, how many kids they had. And what they wanted to do was try to correlate which of those factors was most linked to health. Was there something that people did or did not do that meant they would live longer? So what do we think the most correlated item was with health? Was it money? No. So that old adage, if you can't buy happiness, is absolutely true. It wasn't money. Was it success in your job or power, status? No. It wasn't power or status. It wasn't money. And in fact, the most significant correlation was positive social interaction and sense of purpose in their social circle. That had the greatest connection with health and longevity. They had better outcomes when they dealt with heart disease, they had better outcomes when they dealt with cancer. Social connectedness was the greatest correlation with health and longevity. So that's something we should foster at every turn. And in fact, recent study, feeling alone, truly lonely, has been equated to smoking 2/3 a pack of cigarettes a day.
Wow.
And equates to 15 years, between 6 and 15 years of life lost from feeling chronically alone. Has a significant impact on our health span and longevity. Now, what social engagement looks like for me may look something very different to you. I tend to be on the little more introverted side. I would do fine with 1 or 2 meaningful interactions with 1 or 2 friends. I'm good. My wife's idea of social fulfillment is 500 of her closest friends and a mariachi band, right? She has a very different set point than I do, right? Neither is wrong, they're just different, right? So again, we have to tailor this to our own needs, right? But we need that social interaction. It's imperative that we have it. The M in PERMA is meaning. And attaching meaning to things, again, not only do we find that we're more efficient, but those feel-good hormones increase. Those feelings of stress decrease when we find meaning. So I'm not a dishwasher. I am loath to wash the dishes, but I do it faithfully, and I'm able to attach different meaning to the activity. So it's not so much that I hate dishes now, it's that, well, I guess if I clean them, my family has clean plates to eat off of, right? So I've attached a different meaning to that, right? So find meaning in everything that you do. And if you're doing something that doesn't bring you joy, that you don't find great meaning in, well, maybe we don't do it anymore. Find something else, right? But search for meaning. I think you'll find meaning. And then accomplishment. Now, I'm not going to get on my soapbox about the participation trophy. I think we have to work hard at different things. We should strive to work hard at different things. And maybe this is our hobby, right? Trying to master a craft, whether it's within your work, within your hobby, within your social interest group. There is a sense of achievement that comes when you have to work hard at something. And when you do that, it actually builds what we call self-efficacy. Your belief that you can impact and affect your own health outcomes. So, just a quick run through of PERMA, the tenets of positive psychology. Okay? So, think of a way that you might begin to inject some positivity, to get in the zone, to broaden or enhance your social connection, to find meaning in the things that you do, and to begin to generate your own self-efficacy in the day-to-day. That's how you start to transition to that glass half full kind of person and improve your health span. So, with that, I will finish. And I quote from Mark Twain, "Continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection." Right? So I'm happy to continue to take questions. I hope you found something useful and helpful, and I wish you all well.